Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories and our first story of the day is by Pug C. Boy Scout turned the tables on us. Not sure if it is really malicious, but here comes a story from way back when I was a Boy Scout leader for a group of 14 to 15 years old boys. Whenever a new guy went to his first jamboree, we would often send him away to search for a smoke turner. Pretty much the same way others are tasked with getting some blinker fluid. Everybody understood what was going on and kept sending the poor fellow on. Usually they clued in at the third stop or so. But one time, we had a clever boy whose first jamboree was a huge thing, with 4,000 to 5,000 participants and a 60-40 split gender-wise. So there were a lot of Girl Scouts attending the same jamboree. We did as we usually did, and sent him out to look for a smoke turner so we wouldn't get smoke in our eyes. And off he went. After some time, we realized he hadn't returned and he'd been gone for almost 3 hours. On a smaller jamboree, that wasn't a big deal. We would easily find them somewhere, but this thing covered a lot of ground and us leaders were getting a bit stressed about finding our guy. This was before cell phones were common amongst the teenagers in our group. Eventually, just before our worry became bad enough to call in some help, he returned with a huge smile on his face. Turned out, he'd clued into being set up pretty soon, but he was also smart enough to realize he basically had the run of the camp and could spend his time flirting with Girl Scouts. He had pretty much introduced himself to any and all Girl Scout troops he could see and started flirting with the prettiest girls. He even showed us a notebook filled with phone numbers and addresses so we could keep in touch with the girls after the jamboree was over. The rest of the platoon didn't believe him at first, but over the next days, our campground was constantly visited by Girl Scouts from all over the country. And when he introduced them to his fellow platoon mates, we all believed him. Several of our Boy Scouts had their first summer flings that year, thanks to this guy's opportunism. If you realized you were being trolled in this way, and you had basically hours to go do whatever you want instead of some initiation jamboree type thing, what would you do? Would you go and relax somewhere, take a nap somewhere, try to talk to some people, be an inspiration like this Boy Scout was? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by a cat named Frank. Gastro, you say? A few years back, I was developing a new vineyard and due to the nature of the work, you end up going through a few men. I settled on a reasonably good crew of 8 for the after-planting work that included a bloke we'll call Bobby. When Bobby started with me, he admitted that he had a past that involved some heavy drug use but claimed he was clean for his kids. His brothers must have had other ideas because he was soon back on the gear and his work was slipping. Being casual, I don't mind being flexible with time worked as long as there's communication. But Bobby was coming in late, shooting through early, and at times, simply not turning up. One Monday, he didn't turn up, and when I messaged him to find out what was going on, he said something along the lines of, "Sorry mate, I've got a bit of gastro," which is clearly BS given his history. He's likely been on a bender and woken up at some whore's place and doesn't know which side of town he's on. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. I've got kids at daycare. I know that once they get crook, they are excluded for several days. Why should work be any different? I checked the federal government's health website that recommended exclusion for 3 days after symptoms passed to ensure the bug isn't spread. This is too easy, so I replied to his message, "That's pretty crap. I can't risk it going through the crew and with the number of young kids on the farm, I can't risk it spreading to them. The government recommends 3 days to let it clear properly, so take the rest of the week to get over it, mate." Bobby's 1-day sickie to get over his hangover had suddenly turned into a week's lost wages. And he couldn't argue because as thick as he was, he knew he was just digging himself a hole. Amazingly, he seemed to have learned his lesson and didn't try that BS on me again. As disappointing as it is to see how Bobby's acting here, I think OP deserves a lot of credit to try and work around that. Instead of just outright firing him or disciplining him because of obvious situations going on, OP just kind of plays to how honest Bobby's being with everybody else. And it may or may not have resonated, as Bobby did improve after that. Our next story is by IUL0. My brother told me to never turn off the Wi-Fi on his phone. I said okay. For context, I live in Africa in a well-made city. I'm 21 and a student with side jobs that I can do from home. Not that home Wi-Fi systems are always crappy, but I chose a okay plan that would fit my budget after asking my family to chip in on the monthly bills. Sadly, this Wi-Fi can't handle multiple jobs so easily. When everyone has video streams running on their phones, laptops, and even TV, up to 9 devices, it becomes so hard to work on my computer with the extremely slow internet. So evenings are the worst time for me to work, as everyone gets home then and just wants to chill. I am okay with that, as they are helping with the payment. I've told them about the issue, and the solution was that whenever we are not using a device, we shouldn't keep Wi-Fi on as background data can hog up the connection. And most evenings, I can just have dinner and take a nap. And when I wake up, they'll have gone to sleep already, so I can work comfortably. I like the energy I get from waking up too. Back to my story, last night everything went as usual. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. and everything is so silent, so satisfying. So I sit on my chair and try to load up my websites. They took way longer than they should to show up, so I decided to go in the router terminal on my computer to see the list of devices connected to the Wi-Fi. My PC, my phone, my brother's phone, my brother's iPad. I was like, oh, well, I guess he isn't waking up early tomorrow, but I saw no lights coming from his room. I sneaked there and opened the door. He's sleeping and none of his devices were there. I go downstairs to the living room and I found his phone charging right by the TV. I say, he forgot to turn off the Wi-Fi. So I opened his phone and did it for him. I searched for the iPad but couldn't find it. I went back to my room to find the internet was still laggy but tolerable this time. I sat there for a few hours working until I got sleepy at around 2 a.m. and then went to sleep. This morning at 5 a.m., my brother barges into my room angry and yelling, "Did you turn off the Wi-Fi on my phone?" And me, rubbing my sleepy eye, said, "Yeah?" He yelled back, "Never touch my phone and turn off the Wi-Fi again," and slammed the door on his way out of the room. I think he was downloading a large file or something overnight. I got angry as I was woken up to hear this crap and now I can't even go back to sleep. I thought about what he said, and the idea came to me. Here's the malicious compliance. I'm the only computer geek at home, so I manage the Wi-Fi and such. I got up immediately and got on my computer, opened my Wi-Fi console and got to it. My router lets you create multiple SSIDs. I don't even know why. Basically, it means that from the same router, you can have 2 Wi-Fi signals with different names, like home and neighbors with different passwords. This feature always felt useless as they were both taking internet from the same phone cable. So, I went and did it. I created a second SSID with some unrecognizable name, so now 2 Wi-Fi signals appear, but the latter is strange and there's no need to bat an eye cause it's probably the new neighbors or something. Then I logged in through the second Wi-Fi and cut off the internet connection to the first SSID. I can now turn it on and off like it's a flip of a switch. This won't solve my evening problem, but it was the solution for later. Now, when I'm working, I don't need to check on my family members. I can just cut the connection while preserving mine. And I didn't have to touch my brother's phone. Oh well. Although I do think this is a satisfying revenge, I do think at the same time it's kind of unfair. If everybody's chipping in and paying for the monthly bill, why wouldn't they be allowed to download a large file overnight? Nobody wants to download a large file during the day when they can't use it or the speed's slow to begin with. I guess the main logic why they shouldn't is because it tanks OP's ability to get their work done. Our next story is by Too Many DVS. New Year's Eve at an upscale Chinese restaurant. No more takeout orders accepted the day of. As with many Chinese food places across the US, maybe world, I don't know, New Year's Eve is the biggest night of the year. Hundreds of orders are taken, and because of this, all the orders are placed starting 2 weeks in advance. Everything gets booked before the day of. As with just about every kitchen, there was only one cooking area for both dining and takeout. We set aside a 2-hour window for dining only, as the dining guests would never see any food if it was clogged with hundreds of takeout orders. A guy comes in at about 5 p.m. on New Year's Eve asking to place a takeout. Takeout was shut off 5 to 7. About 10 others had also tried to get takeout earlier and just left angrily, but nobody cared as the phones were ringing off the hook. The hostess politely says all of the takeout is fully booked. It was a certain amount every hour, like 100 orders from 3 to 4, etc. And they have switched to dine-in only. I was standing in front, helping with orders and phone calls, so I witnessed the whole thing. He pauses for a minute, then says, "Okay, I'll take a table for one." The hostess was a bit surprised as she expected him to just leave, and then proceeded to seat him. We had a few small tables open that weren't reserved yet, or they were coming later. He was in my section, so I went right over to him. He places this pretty huge order for one person. He was fine with just the tea and water. I bring it to him about 15 minutes later. He looks down and without taking a bite says, "Thank you, I would like my food packed up now." I cracked up and said no problem, gave it back all wrapped up, and we had another laugh at how he beat the system and he went on his merry way. I was happy to make a tip that I otherwise wouldn't have, and he got his food. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, in situations like this in the future, a restaurant has a no bagging type rule where they probably clarify when you sit down, if you order something sitting down in the restaurant, it is only for in-restaurant eating, otherwise you have to take it out yourself. This next story is by Tosser88899. Rip off customers? Nope. In the early 1990s, I worked for a company that, for deniability, let's call Pizza Shack. Back then, it was a pretty good job. Making pizzas, eating pizzas, and shooting the crap was basically the whole job. I was there for about 1 year when the place started making some changes. The first was that we were no longer making pizza dough. The dough would come frozen in discs that we would essentially just proof for longer. The quality of the food suffered, but at the same time, I didn't care because prepping dough was a crap job anyway. The other was the introduction of new pizzas in the Lovers line. The meat one we had for a while before I started, and it was a good deal, in my honest opinion, but the Pepperoni Lovers and especially the Cheese Lovers pizza was a huge ripoff. Both were essentially just double topping. Literally, a Cheese Lovers was a pizza with extra cheese, and the Pepperoni Lovers was a double pepperoni. But since they were specialty pizzas, we charged a huge price bump. Literally the same for a Meat Lovers, pepperoni, beef/pork blend, Italian sausage and bacon, or the Supreme, pepperoni, sausage, mushrooms, onions, and green peppers. This did not sit well with the big dog. You could get a Pepperoni Lovers for the cost of a 2-topping and a Cheese Lovers for the cost of a 1-topping. We were told by management to upsell the customers on the new Lovers lines as much as we can. But I had a problem with this ethically. I had started as a line cook, but eventually I transitioned to cashier and we answered the phones. Cue the malicious compliance. Every time I answered a call and someone wanted a cheese pizza, I obligingly upsold them by saying, "Would you like to get a Cheese Lovers instead?" And then they asked the price, and I would say, "Well, you could get the same thing for an extra cheese." Every customer asked me why I said that, and I told them that I'm not comfortable overcharging my customers. I probably contributed more in goodwill than the Lovers line ever actually made. Sadly, this kind of thing seems to be the case for most pizza chains from what I see nowadays. If you look at their menu prices, their coupon prices, their specialties and whatnot, a lot of times you'll find out that you're paying near menu prices for things that are marked as saving you a bunch of money. It's kind of scummy the way they try and mislead you sometimes. And our final story of the day is by Artillery Oopsie, reprimanded for compliance with the Student Handbook. I guess I'll just need to comply harder. So I was taking a class for my second master's degree. It was a hybrid in-class and online course in which we were required to communicate an original thought on the topic and respond to 3 other students' posts. These discussions were always different from week to week, and I worked hard to contribute original ideas for discussion and carefully cite my sources. On week 3-ish though, I noticed something odd. Several students' posts were not merely identical to each other, but they were literal copy and paste jobs from an article that I read. At this point, I was suspicious, so I started Googling the first line from every other student post, and lo and behold, roughly 75% of the class was simply copying and pasting from articles they found and citing nothing. No quotation marks or even a link to show where they got it. It was a blatant plagiarism. Now, every student who had bothered to read the handbook should know that it is an ethical violation to not report plagiarism when you encounter it. Here, my compliance begins. I documented my findings and alerted the instructor. At that point, I did not expect much more than a "thanks, I'll look into it," but if that were where it ended, I would not be sharing this here. His response floored me. He wrote back this sternly worded email warning me that other students' grades are not your business. Indeed, other students' grades were not only none of my business, but I never mentioned that. I did not really understand how he jumped from plagiarism to other students' grades. I strongly suspected that he knew that I had caught him with his pants down, and he simply tried to intimidate me into keeping quiet. Because this was such a slap in the face to the hard work I put in, I decided that I needed to comply with the handbook some more. I whipped out my wallet and retrieved the business card of the section head. Thankfully, the section head took it seriously and passed the issue up to the dean of the department. The dean contacted me not long after to confirm my findings with me, as well as the instructor's inappropriate reply. The next class, I mentioned the issue. The instructor claimed that he gave everyone permission to just copy and paste articles in the chat on the one day that I was not able to attend. I know when I am being BS'd. As I am sure the instructor would have said, the consequences were none of my business. However, I have a rough idea. The instructor's name was no longer on the faculty after that semester. I am fairly certain that I had a role in that. I just don't know what the instructor had to gain by going against the grain and saying, "Oh, this is okay. Oh, I told them to copy and paste an article." Is it because they didn't want to put the work in to reprimand all these students for blatantly plagiarizing stuff? Is it because then they'd have to admit that they willingly overlooked plagiarism all this time? Either way, you were probably going to get fired, so you probably should handle it the right way. But they didn't. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.